Welcome back. Our lesson today is going to focus again on the perching birds or the passerines. These birds are over half the birds on the planet would fit into this category. Sometimes people call them perching birds, and sometimes people refer to them as the songbirds. The songbirds is not really an accurate way to describe them, though, because there are perching birds who do not vocalize, and there are passerines, perching birds, such as a crow, most people would not consider a songbird. So basically, the perching birds is a good way to classify them. I'm putting in the very rough, very basic shapes of a blue jay, one of my favorite birds. And you have a number of collection of photo references for passerines, and you can select any one you like. The one I'll be dealing with and discussing specific colored pencil combinations will be the blue jay. But if you choose one of the others, I would be very happy to help you and advise you as you work on that bird. We have a number of the perching birds are very beautiful and are very colorful. There are more than 5,000 species of the passerines, and they tend to be at the smaller end of the bird spectrum, not enormous birds at all. And most of them, but not all of them, have 12 tail feathers. That's just something good to keep in mind as you go about the process of drawing them. Okay, so I'm putting very, very rough pencil sketch in, just getting the basic forms, and then I'll come back and start to refine. Okay. Okay, very scribbly, not at all interested in precision here. And of course, we know the jay has 3 toes forward and 1 toe back. And since he's perched, he's got his bottom toe hooked under the edge of his perch. All right, very, very rough geometric shapes captured there. So I'm going to come back now and clean this up a bit and start to commit to specific contour lines so that I'll have a fairly clean sketch to start off with. The jay is one of my favorite birds. Many years ago, I lived on a farm, and I had an orphaned baby blue jay who was blown out of the top of a 60-foot pecan tree during a thunderstorm. And we followed the advice that you always are given to replace the baby in the nest. Of course, we couldn't reach the top of the 60-foot pecan tree, so we got an extension ladder, and we got about halfway up the tree and nailed a bucket stuffed with straw on the side of the tree. And then we waited, and 2 days passed and no parent birds returned. I don't know what happened to them, but they were gone. And so the blue jay became an adoptee, we hammered a teaspoon into the shape of a bill and fed him with that every 2 hours. He was really tiny and he grew into an adult jay. All right, we get up here with the coloration on a blue jay mask on his face. It's fine to go ahead and block it in because it really distracts your eye and it can help to prevent that. You can go ahead and just put the lines, even though you'll be adding the texture later. Go ahead and indicate that with some sort of line so that your eye doesn't get distracted. It can really distort your sketch. So you want to make note of where that pattern is. Just so you have an idea. It does not have to be precise. All of the detail will be going in when we start to work with the colored pencil. Okay, just have to have some indication of where those patterns start and end. Okay, and on this contour I'm looking, I don't want to oversimplify and make a straight line. I want to notice any bumps. You have the reference photo for this jay in your reference image collection. So if you want to look at that and follow along here, you can. Okay, once again, don't want to oversimplify. This is much more complex than just an arc. So I want to be sure and do that justice. Okay. Cleaning up a little as I go. And you'll notice I'm not using much pressure at all. You don't want to. You want to be able to remove the pencil. You want to be able to see it clearly, but you don't want it to interfere with the delicate shading that you're planning to do with your colored pencil. It's also a good idea to notice the negative spaces that are formed, that are trapped between small objects. In this case, between the in the space between his 2 feet, there's a very distinct, very narrow negative space. Okay. All right. Okay, now I'm coming up to the feather structure. So I want to make sure I pay close attention, and if you can locate, sometimes if you're having trouble establishing a proportion for a certain a certain part of your sketch, it can be helpful if you find something you can use as a unit of measurement. In other words, perhaps you want to make sure that you have the mask of your J not too large and not too small. You can use the eye as a unit of measurement. Count how many eyes forward to the edge of a space above his beak, how many eyes backward until the coloration changes on his feathers, and then likewise how many eyes back to the back of the bird. And it's a good, surprisingly accurate way to be able to plot out your bird. What you don't want to do is actually get a ruler or a straight edge that's marked in increments of an inch or centimeters and actually measure. Your drawing will look very mechanical, and it also slows the development of your eye. You want to be able to see and perceive and put these things down without having to rely on instruments. And so you'll get a much more vital drawing, even if it's not absolutely perfect in proportion, which is not necessary at all. You get a much more vital drawing if you use your eye rather than using formal measurement. All right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and lightly draw in the major groups of his feathers on his wing. First, just the large shapes, not individual feathers, but just the large forms that the silhouettes of those feathers take. Then I'll come back and put in the individual feathers. He also has a lot of very wispy feathers that come up in front of his wing feathers. It's very downy breast feathers and the feathers on his belly. The tiny feathers, very thin feathers, are very difficult in colored pencil to capture. A lot of artists at the very end of the process, if they have tiny whiskery feathers coming back across their work, they'll use a tiny bit of white gouache or a little bit of diluted down white acrylic paint and a very small brush just to put those little thin little wispy feathers in. Colored pencil is not a medium that lends itself well to these tiny white opaque feathers crossing over the intense color that you've already added. So, all right, I'm going to soften this line here a little, just a little. All right, and then start to put in the major feather groups. And remember, the feathers that are closest to the body are the ones that are on top. So a lot of times it's easier to draw from the top of the bird down because these feathers out here are the ones that are the farthest away. These are the ones that are going to be on the underneath of the sort of overlapping pattern. So the top ones are going to be nearest the body, which are these inside feathers. And so if you're actually drawing individual feathers, you may want to start at the top so that the individual feathers will overlap in the right order. And then you have the contour of the outside of the feathers. Don't want to make them too mechanically similar because each feather is slightly unique. They don't look exactly alike, and some of them are partially obscured by the feathers around them. Okay, and this bird has just the ends of these feathers showing. And a lot of the patterning that you'll be seeing is involved in the coloration rather than than being outlined. We'll just reserve that for a colored pencil as well. Okay, I'm just putting in the edges of individual feathers. Okay. Okay. And we have some detail on his feet as well. Okay, I'm going to take just a few minutes to stick my eraser down and clean this up and go over some of these lines a bit more and get my sketch cleaned up and ready to add the dark umber. So I'll be back in about 10 minutes. Welcome back. I've stuck down my eraser, I cleaned up my drawing. I also erased and reworked the forehead of my bird. I felt like I had his head a little too large, and that's something that's always good to guard against. The most interesting part of your drawing, sometimes it's an eye, sometimes it's a head, very frequently it's one of those things, but sometimes it might be a bill or a feather pattern. If you have a particular part of a drawing you're very, very interested in, it's very easy to accidentally make that a little larger than life, and it almost seems to just be part of human nature. It happens quite often, and that is something you have to guard against, and I have to guard against it too. And when I took my bird's head and imagined it as a unit of measurement to check the proportions of the rest of the bird, I very quickly realized that his head was too large, and so I trimmed it down a little bit, and now I have my dark umber pencil, and I'm starting to do an underdrawing. I don't want to make it terribly dark, but I do want to go ahead and do a fairly well developed underdrawing for this bird. And you might wonder what the point of carefully shading in all these markings when they're eventually going to be black. And interestingly, if you try it both ways, you'll discover that by putting this warm neutral beneath it, it gives your whole drawing a warmth and a life that it just lacks if you don't have the underneath layer. And so I think it's well worth investing the time to do it. Plus, it gives you a little preview of the final layer, and you'll have an even better understanding of the patterning in your bird, of where the shadows lie, because you will have already very lightly gone over them. Now I'm not darkening this in at all. You can see it's quite light. That's going to probably be the darkest burnt umber shading of the entire drawing. I am going to go ahead and shade the beak as well, even though, like the patterns, the beak will end up being black. It makes a difference. It really does. Just gives it a little bit more depth, a little bit more life at the end of the process. Just it's sort of an intangible thing, but you do notice a difference if you take the time to put this layer underneath first. I'm going to sharpen my pencil. Once again, imperative on these bird drawings to have a really sharp point. And I'm not going all the way as dark as the final dark will be. Just kind of a medium value at the darkest point, just to indicate where those shadows will be in the final drawing. Okay, and I've got his cape here, his little collar, pretty well shaded. I am, as always, tailoring the pencil strokes to the length and the direction that the feathers grow. So I'm going to come on down and do this shadow that I see on his back. Now it's going to be lighter in value than the pattern here. So you can sort of let this area be your guide for the darkest, where the darkest part of your umber drawing will go. And now this is a very soft shadow, so I'm going to use just the lightest touch, just barely touching the paper. And be careful not to go, only to go as far as the shadow actually goes. And reserve those lighter areas so that they'll remain light. And if you need to darken it a little, you just linger a bit longer. You don't want to increase your pressure. You want your shadows to be very light. Okay. All right. And they fade very quickly as the wing swings around here, top of the wing. All right, I'm going to come on back down here. I'm going to put in just a little just going very lightly, just barely touching the paper. Just get this corner, this leading edge of his wing. And I'm going to leave the areas that are fully white, I'm going to reserve those and leave those white, and we'll be talking more. In fact, we do have a future lesson entirely about drawing white birds, but we'll be talking more about shading white areas in just a moment. I'll go ahead and add a little more. Shadow areas here. And there's a very thin shadow trapped under the edges of many of the feathers. Gives it sort of that look of a series of horizontal lines. And you can see that because this is not a brown bird, our underdrawing is going to be very light. We don't want to interfere, alter the final color by making a very heavy brown layer. So we'll just go very, very lightly. will go along the outside edges of the bird's body, but I'm not going to go in and shade too much on the white. Okay, we'll go ahead and work on his feet just a bit. We have some wonderful shadows. Running the length of his leg. And his nails. They're surprisingly long. Okay. And we can come back and refine this a little more, add a little more to it, to our shaded layer. And fill in his other leg as well. Okay. He's got a lot of texture on his leg, on his legs and feet. Okay. Let's take just a moment and look at this white area that we have before we go too much further with our umber layer. There's a lot of gray shading on this fellow, and it's a very warm gray. And I know when we did our sampler, you saw that a little bit of very lightly applied black very quickly becomes heavy. You have to be really careful with it. The white spreads the black and it becomes very dense. Now this can be, there are times when this is exactly what you're looking for. I can think of times when this would be really useful, but it's a little heavy and a little bluish looking for what we're looking for on our bird. We need sort of a warm gray, and oddly, one way to get it practice this off, not on your bird at first, off your paper first. One way to get a wonderful gray is to take just the merest hint of orange and cloud blue, which is a very soft blue. And you're going to be using more blue than orange. But you can actually get a very nice gray that sort of has peach undertones by combining those two. You may have to go back and forth a couple times. This is optical blending. It's when you put two entirely different colors over one another. Each color shows through a little thanks to the texture of the paper, and your brain blends them into a third different color. So you can actually get kind of a nice, very nice warm color, a warm gray, sorry, kind of a lavender gray with orange and cloud blue. I would experiment with different combinations of grays off on your sampler paper before you start shading the white of your bird. And actually, because it's a warm brown, terracotta and cloud blue also are another gray alternative that give you a warm brown gray. I put the cloud blue down, I put a layer of terracotta, which is a very warm brown, on top. And I'm going to come back, another layer of cloud blue. And you get a very warm, kind of a warm neutral there as well. None of these are exactly what we're looking for with our J. Another alternative is to put white down first. Make sure your pencil is clean, since you won't end up with marks. But you can actually put a layer of white down on your paper, and then with a very light touch, bring back your black and shade on top of the white. It softens the black just a little bit. Just the black by itself, very lightly applied. With a layer of cloud blue. Can also make a nice, sort of a nice gray. Just be careful to keep your touch very light so that you don't spread the black on the surface of the paper. And that actually may be our best bet for shading this fellow, is the very light layer of very, very sharp point, very light layer of black, and some cloud blue layered very lightly on top. So first I do want to show you though the difference that the brown under drawing makes. I'm coming back and putting some black in on top of our underdrawing. And there's just a richness to it that's really, really pleasant. I'm going to come in with a little bit of white. I don't want to spread it too much, but I want to soften this lighter area so there's not quite so much of a contrast between the two colors. Okay. And likewise on the lower part of the beak. I'm being careful to reserve that little thin strip of white along the beak opening. Okay. And come back with a little bit of white just to lighten that area of the beak. Now, having just used the white on top of the black, I need to be very careful not either to sharpen the white first or to remove the black by rubbing the white on a scrap piece of paper before I come back and put it on the white part of the bird's breast, because that would immediately leave a black mark. That would be very difficult to remove. Okay. Come right back up here and start to add in because we have the brown, you don't have to be as particular about the spacing of the texture, because the brown will already give you a dark texture behind the black, and the eye sees it all as part of one and the same, and so you get this very nice, rich, mixed texture, and it creates a very nice edge along the little cape or the cowl that our bird has. Now, I want this to be feather-like and irregular, so I am not starting at this side and drawing, because it would look very clipped off. So I'm just going very systematically along and drawing back toward the front of the bird so that there's sort of a natural fading of the black feathers as it goes forward. Okay. Okay, and now I'm going to let my strokes, it's very heavy and you don't see a lot of light, so I can just fill this in with pencil strokes. I don't have to be too particular about them. But I do want to continue to work in the direction the feathers grow. Just filling in so that I lose all of the texture of the paper there, so there's not white showing through that very dark area of the bird's coloring. And again, having the umber underdrawing just gives it an extra richness. That is really nice. Okay, I'm going to reverse here because this side is very straight, so I don't want it to look too furry or feathery. I want it to be very controlled. Okay. All right. Let's talk just a moment about the blue. We're going to be using a combination of true blue and cloud blue, and the darker areas, of course, come right in and glaze over the umber, which will give us a very rich blue shadow. We can temper this blue if it starts to look a little too turquoisey for you with cloud blue, which is a very cool, very light color that works very, very nicely with true blue. And the umber helps tone it down as well. We're working with a very limited palette in this class. And so we can blend different colors to warm up or cool down colors as we need to do so. But for now, we're going to put down a basic layer. Just going slowly, just lingering in the places where I want to build up a little more color. And we'll just work our way around, just very gently building up color where we need to do so. Remember that if you increase pressure, you'll pick up some of the dark umber beneath, give you a very rich dark shadow. And you can come back where you have black areas. You want to use the black sparingly. A, because it is very powerful, and B, because it's part of the bird's markings. So you want to reserve it mainly for where you really do see black on the bird himself. And let's take a moment, sharpen our black very, very sharp, and do a little shading on the white area of the bird. Anywhere you use black, we're going to use it just very, very, very sparingly. Okay, it's part of the facial feathers here, very short feathers, so I'm using short, very short strokes of the pencil. it does become quite dark. Okay. All right, we have a lot of gray. Down in the vicinity of the bird's belly, so I'm shading just very, 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 very lightly with very short or very gentle strokes. The feathers are in a little bit of disarray along here because some of them are blowing back up toward the wing. Very, very, very gentle shading, and we're going to linger longer. We're going to be careful not to completely fill in any areas. And we want to keep our pencil very, very sharp. There's a shadow beneath the wing here. Again, we're being just very, very gentle with that color, though. We are not adding a great deal of shadow. Okay. One thing you may want to do at the end, particularly in view of the fact that the reference photo has a warm brown background, you may want to put a contrasting background color behind your J, if you're doing the J, at the end of the process, which will make his white feathers stand out. And it will also resemble the reference photo a little more. Okay, I'm going to take it, be very, very light with the black shading. I don't want to overdo it at all. And I'll come back and look again later, because often a subsequent look will show you shadows that you missed the first time out. I'm going to continue to work on this blue jay. I am going to post a series of step-by-step photos as I move along with him, and I will include notes on the specific colors that I blended, and that will be in the form of a photo tutorial on the lesson. So go ahead and choose a passerine from the reference photos, one that appeals to you, that you'd like to spend a little bit of time with. Do a pencil sketch first. Choose a body part to use as a unit of measurement if you feel the part of your sketch is off, so that you can check yourself, but don't measure with a ruler. And happy drawing!